The sun began to turn red as the warm air of Jerusalem trembled with the clamor of the crowd. On top of a dusty hill, 3 crosses stood like ominous silhouettes against the sky. For the Roman soldiers, this was just another day on the job, another execution, another criminal meeting his fate. But something was different. The Centurion, a man hardened by war and brutality, watched the scene with an unusual sense of unease. He had overseen countless executions, witnessed the despair in the eyes of the condemned, heard their pleas and screams. Yet this man, Jesus of Nazareth, did not scream, he did not beg, he did not curse. Instead, with his body torn and a crown of thorns embedded in his forehead, he lifted his gaze toward the heavens. And then the world began to darken. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. Matthew 27-45. The execution on Golgotha Hill, the dry ground, crunched beneath the feet of the crowd, gathering to witness the final moments of this trial. Women wept, some watched in horror, others with morbid curiosity. At the foot of the cross, the Roman soldiers carried out their duty without hesitation. Nails pierced the flesh of the condemned, and the wood absorbed the dull echoes of the hammer striking forcefully. The centurion stood firm, impassive, arms crossed over his chest. He had seen this spectacle too many times. To him, crucifixion was merely a tool of control, a warning to those who dared to defy Rome. But there was something unsettling about this man. Jesus did not scream in agony like the others. He did not plead for his life or curse his executioners. Instead, when he spoke, he did so with an unusual serenity. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. The words echoed in the centurion's mind. His experience told him that no condemned man asked for forgiveness for his own executioners. Compassion was not a luxury they could afford. From his position, he could see the soldiers gambling for the crucified man's tunic, a routine act, insignificant under normal circumstances, but now it seemed imbued with an eerie symbolism. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, one for each soldier. They also took his tunic, which was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. John 19:23. The centurion furrowed his brow. Something in the air had shifted, but it was not just his imagination. The first shadows began to cover the land, and a chill ran down his spine. The centurion and the might of the Roman Empire. The centurion adjusted his leather belt as he observed the scene from a safe distance. His duty was to ensure the sentence was carried out, maintain order, and make sure the execution proceeded without interruption. He was a leader, a commander of 100 men, trained for war, obedience, and iron discipline. Rome had taught him that strength was everything. In the empire, there was no room for compassion. Roman justice was swift and brutal. However, what was happening on that hill defied everything he knew. His men, indifferent to the suffering of the crucified man, entertained themselves by throwing dice on the dusty ground. They gambled for the Nazarene's tunic as if it were just another spoil of war. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Psalm 22:18. The centurion watched them with disapproval, but said nothing. What did it matter? After all, this was part of the procedure, and yet he felt something was off. Jesus did not respond with hatred or anger. His gaze did not reflect the fear he was so used to seeing in the condemned. Even with his body torn by whips and his face covered in dried blood, his expression radiated something different. Was it serenity? Acceptance? The centurion lifted his eyes to the sky. The clouds were beginning to thicken, and the sunlight was fading. He wondered if it was just his imagination, until he felt a strange silence enveloping the place. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. He took a deep breath. Something inside him told him this was no ordinary execution. Nature convulses. A deep roar emerged from the depths of the earth. At first it was a subtle tremor beneath the centurion's feet, barely noticeable, but within seconds the ground began to shake with unusual violence. Stones tumbled down the hillside, the air grew thick, and the voices of the crowd turned into screams of panic. The centurion, accustomed to the chaos of war, felt something he had not felt in years: fear. He looked at the condemned man. Jesus had let his head fall against his chest. His breath was weak, his body barely moved. But what terrified the centurion most was not the imminent death of the Nazarene, but what was happening around them. The sun, which had shone brightly just moments ago, was suddenly extinguished, as if an invisible shadow had enveloped the earth. This was no ordinary storm. This was no ordinary storm. These were not passing clouds. The darkness was absolute. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. Matthew 27:45. The soldiers, who had once been indifferent, now looked around in confusion. Some tried to maintain their composure, but the terror was evident in their eyes. The centurion clenched his fists. He had never been a superstitious man, but he could not ignore what was happening. The earthquake intensified. From the city, screams could be heard. Then, something unimaginable occurred. The thick and heavy veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, as if invisible hands had ripped it apart. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, and the rocks split. Matthew 27:51. The centurion felt his stomach churn. Everything he had ever known about the world and Rome's gods was collapsing before him. Something divine was happening. Truly, this was the Son of God. The centurion struggled to catch his breath. Around him, chaos reigned. The earthquake had left deep cracks in the ground, and the darkness remained as if nature itself was in mourning. Yet his focus was on one thing: the man on the cross. Jesus lifted his gaze with one final effort. His cracked lips parted, and in a voice filled with both agony and an inexplicable peace, he spoke his last words. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." Luke 23:46. Then he exhaled for the last time. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the tremors. Everything stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The centurion felt his knees weaken. He had seen many deaths before, but never one like this. Never had he witnessed someone die with such dignity, with such surrender. He looked at Jesus' pierced hands, his wounded side, his head tilted in final rest. The image was burned into his mind forever. Something inside him broke. His chest filled with an unfamiliar sensation, a mix of fear and reverence. Then, without thinking, the words escaped his lips. They were not orders from a superior. They were not dictated by military protocol. It was pure recognition, a spontaneous revelation. Truly, this was the Son of God. Matthew 27:54. The soldiers remained silent. The soldiers around him looked on in silence. No one dared to contradict him, because deep down, they had all felt it. The centurion lowered his gaze. Nothing would ever be the same again. The centurion's transformation. The crowd began to disperse. Some walked away in silence, others whispered in confusion. The centurion remained still, his eyes fixed on the lifeless body of Jesus. His own words still echoed in his mind. Truly, this was the Son of God. But what did that truly mean? That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jesus' serene face on the cross. He remembered his words of forgiveness, his surrender, the darkness that had covered the earth. Something within him had changed. For days, he continued his duties in the Roman army, but his mind was elsewhere. He searched for answers. He heard rumors that Jesus' body had vanished from the tomb, that some claimed to have seen him risen. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. The centurion shivered. Could it be true? Finally, he approached a group of Jesus' followers, men and women who spoke of love, redemption, and a kingdom not of this world. In their words, the centurion found something he had never felt before: peace. He knew what it meant to abandon his loyalty to Rome. A soldier of the empire could not simply follow another path. But within him, a new loyalty was being born, one not founded on the strength of the sword, but on the truth he had witnessed that day on Golgotha. And so he made the most important decision of his life, to leave his past behind and follow Jesus. Martyrdom and redemption. Leaving the army was not easy. Rome did not forgive betrayal, but the centurion no longer feared death. He had seen Jesus face it with courage, and that had transformed his soul. He joined the followers of Christ, learned his teachings, and began to preach them. He was no longer a commander of soldiers, but a messenger of truth. His name spread. Some respected him for being a witness to the crucifixion. Others saw him as a traitor to the empire. It wasn't long before Roman authorities took action. He was arrested, interrogated, and tortured. They wanted him to deny what he had seen. They wanted him to declare that Jesus was nothing more than a man. But the centurion remained steadfast. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. The torture did not break him. He was sentenced to death. He knew his end was near, but in his heart there was an indescribable peace. On the day of his execution, he looked up at the sky one last time. He remembered Jesus' face on the cross, and he smiled. His story did not end there. The swords fell, but his story did not end there. His testimony endured, and his name became inscribed in Christian history. Many remembered him as Longinus, the soldier who saw the truth on Golgotha and gave his life for it. And so, the man who once served Rome found his true home in the kingdom of God. The story of the centurion reminds us of the transformative power of encountering Jesus. He was a man accustomed to violence, to the might of the empire, to the cold brutality of war. Yet one glance at the cross changed his destiny. Jesus did not speak to him directly. He did not persuade him with speeches or miracles. He simply died with dignity, forgiving his executioners, showing that his kingdom was not of this world. And that was enough for a Roman soldier to see the truth. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Luke 19:10. If a man hardened by battle could find faith in the midst of death, then anyone can. The cross is not just a symbol of suffering, it is a symbol of hope. Perhaps like the centurion, many today are searching for answers. Perhaps they have grown up believing in strength, in the power of the world, in human certainty. But there are moments when the ground shakes beneath us, when darkness covers our lives. And it is in those moments that the truth is revealed. Let the story of Longinus inspire us to look beyond what we see, to seek the light in the midst of the storm, and to recognize that true strength is not found in the sword, but in faith. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell to receive more stories like this. See you in the next video.